The hand connected with the wall beside her head, not with her skin. It was a near thing, a breath away. The plaster gave a soft, sickening crunch, a spiderweb of cracks appearing in the pristine white paint of the hospital corridor. Dust, fine as powdered sugar, drifted down onto the shoulder of her scrubs. She did not flinch. She did not scream. Dr. Eris Thorne had spent 10 years of her life learning not to react to Dr. Marcus Thorne, 10 years of marriage, and 2 years of a divorce so acrimonious it felt like a continuation of the marriage by other, more expensive means. She had learned to become a statue, a column of ice, a thing he could not break because it was already frozen solid. "You went over my head," Marcus hissed, his voice a low, furious thing that was somehow louder than a shout. His face was too close, smelling of stale coffee and the cloying mint of the gum he chewed to hide the scent of cigarettes. His eyes, the same blue that had once made her heart feel like a hummingbird in a cage, were now just chips of cold, hard glass. "That was my surgery, my patient, my name on that publication." Aris kept her gaze fixed on the wall behind him, on a fire extinguisher sign. Red and white, simple, clear, an instruction for an emergency. She wished for an emergency, a real one, with alarms and running and a clear protocol to follow. Not this messy, intimate, and deeply familiar brand of terror. "The patient was deteriorating, Marcus," she said. Her voice was low, steady, the voice she used to deliver bad news, to calm a panicked resident. It was a tool, and she wielded it with precision. "The on-call surgeon was in another critical procedure. I was available. I made the call." "You made the call," he mimicked, his lips twisting into a sneer. He was performing. He was always performing. For the unseen audience of his own ego. "You stole my glory, Eris. You've been doing it for years. Living in my house, using my name, and all the while chipping away at me." She thought about the house, which she had paid the mortgage on for the last 3 years of their marriage with her own salary. She thought about the name, which she kept only because changing it on all her licenses and publications was a bureaucratic nightmare she did not have the energy to face. She thought about the chipping away, and wondered if he ever realized it was his own hammer, his own chisel, doing all the work. "Let go of my arm," she said. She hadn't even realized he had grabbed it. His fingers were a vice around her bicep, tight enough to bruise. The fabric of her scrubs was no protection. "You have an obligation," he snarled, his grip tightening. "An obligation to me, to what we built." A nurse, young, with wide, frightened eyes, scurried past, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking in the sudden, heavy silence of the corridor. She did not make eye contact. No one ever did. Marcus had a way of creating a bubble of non-reality around himself, a space where the normal rules of social intervention did not seem to apply. He was a senior attending, a man with a reputation for brilliance and a temper that was politely ignored. He was a problem for later. He was always a problem for later. "What you built, Marcus," Eris corrected, her voice still impossibly calm, "was a cage. I am no longer in it. Now, for the last time, let go." He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Or what? You'll what, Eris? Call security? File another useless piece of paper with HR? They know. They all know. You're my wife." "I am your ex-wife," she stated. A fact, cold and hard and true. His face darkened. The performance was over. This was the real Marcus, the one she knew from late nights and locked doors. "You'll always be mine." He raised his other hand. She braced herself, not for the impact, but for the humiliation, for the sound it would make, for the quiet, pitying looks that would follow, for the paperwork, for the sheer, bone-deep weariness of it all. A sound cut through the tension. It was not loud. A soft clink. The sound of a heavy cufflink tapping against a glass. From a previously unnoticed doorway, a private waiting room for the oncology wing's most generous benefactors, a man stepped out. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply occupied the space, and in doing so, changed its entire composition. The air, which had been thin and sharp with adrenaline, suddenly became thick, heavy, and still. The hum of the hospital's ventilation system seemed to quiet. The frantic energy of Marcus's rage dissipated, leaving only a residue of pathetic theatrical anger. The man was a study in stillness. He wore a charcoal suit of such exquisite cut it seemed less like clothing and more like a second, more perfect skin. His hair was black, his face composed of elegant, severe lines that seemed to have been carved from marble and then softened by a deep, abiding tiredness. He was holding a small glass of what looked like water. It was from this glass that the sound had come. He took a slow, deliberate sip, his dark eyes moving from Marcus's hand on Eris's arm to Marcus's face, contorted with rage, and then, finally, to Aris. His gaze was not pitying. It was not curious. It was assessing, like a master craftsman examining a piece of wood, noting the grain, the strength, the hidden flaws. For the first time in a very long time, Eris felt seen, not as Marcus's wife, not as a victim, not as a problem, just as herself. It was a disorienting, terrifying, and profoundly relieving sensation. Marcus, disoriented by the sudden shift in audience, finally seemed to notice the man. His hold on Eris's arm loosened slightly. "This is a private conversation," he snapped, trying to reclaim his authority. The man in the suit said nothing. He simply lowered his glass and looked at Marcus's hand, still clamped on Eris's arm. He did not look at Marcus's face. Only the hand. He looked at it with a kind of detached academic interest, as if it were a particularly fascinating but ultimately repulsive insect. The silence stretched. It was a different kind of silence now, not the empty silence of a deserted corridor, but a weighted silence. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, the kind that has power. Marcus, who thrived on noise and reaction, began to unravel in it. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his upper lip. He glanced from the silent man to Eris, then back again. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, and he had no file at all on this new variable. "I said," Marcus began again, his voice now a little too loud, a little too brittle. "This is private." The man finally spoke. His voice was low, a quiet baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. It held no anger, no threat. It was a simple statement of fact. "Take your hand off of her." It was not a request. Marcus, in a final, fatal burst of arrogance, scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" The man's gaze finally lifted from Marcus's hand to his face. He offered no name, no title. He simply held Marcus's eyes, and in that gaze, Eris saw the vast, cold, and utterly indifferent power of the truly wealthy and the truly dangerous. It was the look of a sovereign inspecting a trespasser. Behind the man, another figure appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. A shorter man, older, with graying hair, wearing a suit that was just as impeccable. This man, Mr. Kim, held a phone to his ear, but his eyes were fixed on the scene. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Two large men in dark, simple suits materialized from the far end of the corridor. They moved with a liquid, unnerving grace. There was no wasted motion. They were not hospital security. Hospital security were paunchy and bored. These men were sharp, focused, and moved as if they were part of a single coordinated organism. They did not look at the man in the charcoal suit. They did not look at Eris. Their entire world had narrowed to Marcus Thorne. Marcus finally let go of Eris's arm. He took a half step back, his bravado crumbling into dust. The change was so abrupt it was almost comical. The arrogant tyrant of one moment was now just a man in a corridor, suddenly aware of his own fragility. "Now, wait a minute," he stammered, holding up his hands. "There's been a misunderstanding." The man in the charcoal suit, Julian Choi, finally turned his full attention to Eris. He ignored Marcus completely, as if he had already been erased from the equation. "Are you all right, Dr. Thorne?" he asked. He knew her name. Of course, he did. Eris looked down at her arm. A faint red imprint of Marcus's fingers was already beginning to bloom against her skin, the first stage of a bruise. She rubbed it absently. "I'm fine," she said. It was her standard answer. The truth was a more complicated thing, a tangled knot of exhaustion, anger, and a strange, hollow ache. Julian Choi's eyes followed her movement, his expression unreadable. "No," he said, his voice soft but absolute. "You are not." The two large men had reached Marcus. They didn't grab him. They simply flanked him, their presence an undeniable wall. One of them murmured something too low for Eris to hear. Marcus, his face pale and slack with shock, allowed himself to be guided away, back down the corridor, away from the elevators toward a service exit. He did not look back. The corridor was quiet again. The young nurse from before poked her head around the corner, saw the man in the charcoal suit, and quickly retreated. "Mr. Kim," Julian Choi said without turning. "Yes, Mr. Choi," the older man replied, stepping forward. He was no longer on the phone. "Please escort Dr. Thorne to the Nightingale suite. See that she has whatever she needs. A meal, a change of clothes, and cancel my remaining appointments for the day." "Of course, Mr. Choi." Mr. Kim inclined his head toward Eris. "Dr. Thorne, if you would please follow me." Eris stood frozen. The Nightingale suite was the hospital's most luxurious private room, reserved for visiting royalty and billionaires with esoteric, terminal diseases. She had been in it once to consult on a case. It was larger than her apartment. I have patience," she stammered, the professional in her clawing for purchase in the swirling chaos of the last 10 minutes. "I have rounds. I can't just—" "It's handled," Julian Choi said. It was the same tone he had used with Marcus. A statement of inevitable outcome. He looked at Mr. Kim. "Have Dr. Ramirez cover her post-op checks. And reschedule her afternoon consults. She is on personal leave. Effective immediately." Mr. Kim was already tapping on his phone. "Already done, sir." Eris felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Her life, her meticulously structured, tightly controlled professional schedule, was being dismantled and reassembled in seconds by men she had never met. It was terrifying. It was also, in a way she was not yet ready to admit, a profound relief. "I don't understand," she said, looking at Julian Choi. "Who are you?" He finally offered her a hint of a smile. It was not a warm thing. It was a brief, wry acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. "My name is Julian Choi. My mother is a patient on this floor, and I am the man who is about to have a very serious conversation with the board of this hospital." He gestured to the waiting room he had exited. "But first, I believe we have a more pressing matter to discuss." "After you, doctor." She followed Mr. Kim. What else was there to do? The world had tilted on its axis, and Julian Choi seemed to be the only one who knew which way was up. The Nightingale suite was less like a hospital room and more like a 5-star hotel. There was a sitting area with a velvet sofa, a small dining table, and a wall of windows overlooking the city. The bed was in an adjacent room, behind a heavy door. The air smelled faintly of lavender, not antiseptic. Mr. Kim was a phantom of efficiency. He spoke quietly into his phone in Korean, and within minutes things began to arrive. A tray with a steaming bowl of soup, a small salad, and a pot of tea. A rack of clothing holding several options, all in her size, from tailored trousers and silk blouses to a simple, soft-looking cashmere sweater and lounge pants. "Mr. Choi apologizes for the presumption," Mr. Kim said, his English precise. "He was not sure of your preferences. Please, eat. Rest. He will join you shortly." Eris sat on the velvet sofa, her body feeling heavy and disconnected. She looked at the soup. It was juk, a Korean rice porridge, the kind her own grandmother used to make for her when she was sick. It was a strangely intimate, comforting detail in a day that had been anything but. She thought about Marcus. She thought about him being led away by those two silent men. Where had they taken him? What had they said? For a brief, ugly moment, she felt a sliver of fear for him. It was an old habit, the ingrained instinct of an abused wife to manage her abuser's emotions, to anticipate his needs, to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. She pushed the feeling away. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that had been amputated long ago. He was not her problem anymore. She ate the soup. It was warm and savory, and with each spoonful she felt a little more human, a little less like a statue in a corridor. She was just starting on the tea when Julian Choi entered. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and the intricate lines of a tattoo that snaked up from his wrist. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like what he probably was, something older, more dangerous. He did not sit. He moved to the window, looking out at the sprawling cityscape. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room. "The CEO of this hospital has certain standards," he said, his voice a low murmur. "For discretion, for the comfort of his donors. He has failed on both counts today." "You're a donor," Eris stated. It was coming into focus now. The deference, the immediate access, the power. "My family foundation is," he corrected gently. "We funded the construction of this wing. In return, we were promised a certain level of peace." That peace was disturbed. He turned from the window, his dark eyes finding hers. "I had you researched, Dr. Thorne, after my mother was admitted." Eris felt a chill, despite the warmth of the room. "Why?" "Because my mother's condition is complex. She requires a difficult, high-risk surgical procedure. Her current physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, is competent. He is textbook, but he lacks artistry. The hospital's own internal metrics, however, point to a surgeon with a 98.7% success rate on similarly complex high-risk procedures, a surgeon whose complication rates are the lowest in the state, a surgeon who has pioneered 2 separate microsuturing techniques that are currently being taught at Johns Hopkins." He paused, letting the information settle in the air between them. "That surgeon is you," he finished. Eris stared at him, speechless. She knew her own record, of course. She was proud of her work, of her skill. But to hear it laid out like that, as a series of cold, hard, undeniable facts by this stranger, it was like seeing her own reflection for the first time. Marcus had always framed her successes as offshoots of his own. "We make a great team," he'd say, even when she had done all the work. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. "So, when I asked Dr. Finch why he wasn't recommending you for the procedure," Julian continued, his voice dropping an octave, "he became evasive. He mentioned politics. He mentioned that you were a brilliant but difficult colleague. He mentioned your ex-husband, Dr. Marcus Thorne, who is, I believe, the chief of surgery and a close personal friend of Dr. Finch." Eris felt a familiar, bitter taste in her mouth. Politics. It was always politics. Marcus had spent years carefully cultivating his relationships, building alliances, ensuring he was the one who controlled the narrative. She had focused on her work, foolishly believing that competence was its own reward. "He blocked me," she said, the words flat and dead. "He's been doing it for months. Every interesting case, every opportunity for research, it gets redirected. I'm being professionally starved out." "Yes," Julian said simply. "I had gathered as much." He walked over and sat in the armchair across from her. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. He was no longer a distant, powerful figure. He was a man in a room, having a conversation, but the power was still there. It radiated from him, a quiet, steady heat. "My mother's surgery is in 3 days," he said. "I would like you to perform it." It was not a question. It was an offer. A lifeline. But it was a lifeline attached to a very large, very powerful, and very unknown entity. "Marcus will never allow it," she said automatically. "He sits on the surgical review board. He'll block the authorization." Julian's lips quirked in that ghost of a smile again. "Let's not concern ourselves with what Dr. Marcus Thorne will or will not do. His opinions are, as of about 30 minutes ago, entirely irrelevant. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Kim is currently having a conversation with him," Julian said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "It is a conversation about professional conduct, workplace harassment, and the significant financial and reputational damage that can befall a man who makes the wrong enemies. It is also a conversation about a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive he will not be able to order a coffee in this city without consulting a lawyer first." Eris felt a wave of dizziness. It was too much, too fast. Years of frustration, of quiet struggle, of being gaslit and undermined, and this man had just erased the problem. In 30 minutes. "You can't just do that," she said, but the protest was weak. It was clear that he could. It was clear that he had. "I can," he said, his gaze unwavering. "The question is, Dr. Thorne, what will you do? I am offering you an opportunity, not just to perform this surgery, but to do your work without impediment. My family is prepared to endow a new research chair at this hospital, a center for advanced surgical innovation. We would, of course, require a director of unimpeachable skill and singular vision to run it." He was offering her a kingdom built on her own merit, funded by his immense resources. It was everything she had ever wanted, handed to her on a silver platter by a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a gangster. She thought about the exhaustion. The quiet, grinding exhaustion of fighting a battle on 2 fronts every single day. The battle in the operating room, which she loved, and the battle in the corridors and boardrooms, which was slowly killing her. She looked at Julian Choi. He was not a good man. Good men did not have other men who moved like shadows and made problems disappear. But he was, perhaps, a just man. Or at least, his interests and the interests of justice had, for the moment, aligned. "I will need to see your mother's files," she said. Her voice was steady again. The surgeon was back in control. "All of them. And I will need to consult with her directly. I will not operate unless I am confident of a positive outcome." A real smile finally reached Julian Choi's eyes. It transformed his face, chasing away some of the weariness. "I would expect nothing less, Doctor." He stood up. "Mr. Kim has arranged for a car to take you to my family's estate outside the city. You will be safer there. You can review the files, rest, and meet my mother in the morning. Your things will be collected from your apartment." "My apartment," she began, a fresh wave of panic rising. Marcus still had a key. "Is currently being secured by my team," Julian finished smoothly. "The locks have been changed. A restraining order is being filed on your behalf. Marcus Thorne will not come near you again." She did not know what to say. "Thank you" seemed laughably inadequate. "This is insane" seemed stating the obvious. So she said nothing. She simply nodded. He nodded back, a gesture of mutual understanding. "Rest, Dr. Thorne. The next few days will be complicated." He left, closing the door softly behind him. The silence he left in his wake was different. It was not empty. It was full of possibility. Eris stood up and walked to the window, mirroring the pose he had struck earlier. She looked out at the city, at the endless grid of lights coming on as dusk settled. Her city. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she might have a place in it again. The car that took her from the hospital was a black sedan with windows so dark they seemed to drink the light. It moved through the city traffic with an unhurried, inevitable grace, other cars seeming to melt out of its way. Mr. Kim sat in the passenger seat, speaking quietly on his phone. Eris sat in the back, the supple leather cool against her skin. She felt suspended between 2 worlds. The world of yesterday, with its petty humiliations and grinding struggles, and the world of tomorrow, which was a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating unknown. The estate was an hour outside the city, nestled in a valley of rolling hills. A long, winding driveway led to a set of imposing iron gates. An old woman, her face a beautiful roadmap of wrinkles, opened the gates from a small gatehouse. She smiled at Eris, a genuine welcoming smile, and said something in Korean to the driver. The house itself was not what she expected. It was not a gaudy McMansion. It was a modern masterpiece of glass, steel, and warm wood. built into the side of a hill, overlooking a serene lake. It was a house that was in conversation with its surroundings, not one that sought to dominate them. Julian Choi's mother was waiting for her on the terrace. She was a tiny woman, fragile as a bird, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl. Her hair was pure white, but her eyes were the same sharp, intelligent black as her son's. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice a soft, musical whisper. "My son tells me you are a miracle worker. I am not in need of a miracle, just a very steady hand." They talked for over an hour. Not about the surgery, not about medicine. They talked about art, about gardening, about the migratory patterns of the birds that visited the lake. Mrs. Choi was sharp, funny, and utterly unsentimental. She had lived a full life, and she faced its end with a calm, pragmatic grace that Aris found deeply moving. "My son is a complicated man," Mrs. Choi said as the sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink. "He sees the world in terms of assets and liabilities, strengths and weaknesses. He does not give his trust easily, but once he does, it is absolute." She looked at Aris, her gaze penetrating. "He has decided you are an asset, doctor, a strength. Do not prove him wrong." Later that night, in a guest suite that was larger and more luxurious than any hotel she had ever stayed in, Eris reviewed the files. They were all there, digitized and organized on a tablet that had been left for her. Every scan, every lab result, every note from every doctor who had ever seen Mrs. Choi. Julian had been right. The case was complex. A tumor wrapped around the aortic arch, in a position most surgeons would deem inoperable. But as Eris studied the 3D renderings tracing the pathways of nerves and blood vessels, she saw it. A way in. A narrow, dangerous, but possible path. It would require one of the techniques she had pioneered. It would require absolute precision. It would require the steadiest hand in the world. She felt a thrill run through her, not of fear, but of excitement. This was what she was born to do. This was the work. The pure, clean, beautiful work, stripped of all the politics and the ego and the noise. She worked for hours, sketching out a surgical plan, running simulations in her head. She lost all track of time. It was only when a soft knock came at her door that she realized it was past midnight. It was Julian. He was holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. In the soft light of the hallway, he looked younger, less formidable. The tattoo on his arm was a complex, beautiful dragon. "Mr. Kim told me you were still working," he said, his voice low. "I thought you might need this." He set the tray down on a small table. He did not intrude further into the room. He respected her space. It was a small thing, but after years with Marcus, who had respected no boundaries, it felt monumental. "I've found a way," she said, her voice filled with a passion she had not felt in years. "It's risky, but it's possible. I can do it." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the flush on her cheeks. He looked at the tablet, filled with her notes and diagrams. He was not looking at a woman he had rescued. He was looking at a master of her craft, fully engaged in her element. "I know," he said. The next 2 days passed in a strange, peaceful blur. Eris spent her time refining her surgical plan, consulting with Mrs. Choi, and taking long walks around the lake. Julian was a quiet, unobtrusive presence. They shared meals, sat in comfortable silence on the terrace, and talked. They talked about everything and nothing. He asked her about her research, and listened with an intensity that made her feel as if she were the most interesting person in the world. She asked him about the house, and he told her the story of how his father had built it, piece by piece. It was a slow, respectful courtship of the mind. There was no passion, no romance in the traditional sense. But there was something deeper, a recognition, a sense of 2 people who had been moving on parallel, lonely tracks, suddenly finding that their paths had converged. She was beginning to understand the kind of silence that he carried with him. It was not an absence of sound. It was a fullness, a self-contained world. He was not waiting for someone to fill it. He was waiting for someone who could comfortably inhabit it with him. On the morning of the surgery, a package arrived for her. It was from Julian. Inside was a set of brand-new, custom-tailored surgical scrubs in a deep emerald green. They were made of a fine, breathable fabric she had never seen before. Tucked into the pocket was a note written in a precise, elegant hand, for the master of her craft, J.C. She put them on. They fit perfectly. The surgery was an 8-hour marathon. In the operating room, Eris was no longer Eris Thorne, the woman with the complicated past. She was a force of nature, her hands, guided by years of experience and an intuitive genius, moved with a speed and precision that left the assisting surgical team in awe. She was in a state of pure flow, the world narrowed to the delicate dance of her instruments in the fragile landscape of a human life. She did it. She removed the tumor piece by piece and reconstructed the aortic arch with painstaking care. It was the most difficult and the most beautiful work she had ever done. When she finally walked out of the OR, exhausted but triumphant, Julian was there. He was standing in the same spot in the corridor where he had first seen her, where Marcus had assaulted her. He was holding a single cup of coffee. He offered it to her. "She's in recovery," Eris said, her voice hoarse. "The next 24 hours are critical, but the procedure was a success." He took the coffee back when he saw her hands were trembling and set it down on a nearby ledge. He did not touch her. He did not offer empty platitudes. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," he said. And in those 3 words, she heard everything. You were right. You were brilliant. You were worth it. The news of her success and of who she had operated on spread through the hospital like wildfire. Whispers followed her in the hallways. Doctors who had previously ignored her now stopped to congratulate her. Dr. Finch, the man who had called her difficult, tried to engage her in a conversation about her technique. She gave him a polite, cool smile and kept walking. She was a commodity again, a star, but this time it was on her own terms. She had expected Marcus to be a ghost, a problem solved, a file closed, but she had underestimated the sheer, bottomless depth of his ego. A week after the surgery, she was served with papers. Marcus was suing her for professional misconduct, for stealing his intellectual property. He was filing a complaint with the state medical board, claiming she was emotionally unstable, that her actions had endangered a patient. His patient, the one she had saved on the day everything changed. He was also filing for a reevaluation of their divorce settlement, claiming she had hidden assets. The asset, it seemed, was Julian Choi. It was a desperate, pathetic, and utterly predictable move. It was the lashing out of a cornered animal. She was in the hospital cafeteria reading the documents with a kind of numb disbelief when Lena, the nurse who had been her friend and confidant through the worst of the divorce, slid into the seat opposite her. "I heard," Lena said, her face grim. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "It seems not," Eris said, pushing the papers away. The food on her tray suddenly looked inedible. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Eris admitted. "Julian's lawyers will handle it, I suppose." "He seems capable," Lena said, with massive understatement. "The whole hospital is talking. They say he bought the hospital's debt last week, all of it, from some bank in Singapore. Is that true?" Eris just shook her head. She didn't know. Julian moved in a world of finance and power that was as foreign to her as the dark side of the moon. He had assured her it would be handled. She was trying to trust that. The annual Obsidian Gala, the hospital's biggest fundraising event, was 2 weeks later. It was the glittering centerpiece of the city's social calendar. Eris had no intention of going. She had been with Marcus twice before and had hated every moment of the forced smiles and vapid conversation. But Julian asked her to go. "My mother will be making her first public appearance since the surgery," he said. They were on the terrace at the estate, watching the fireflies begin their nightly ballet over the lake. "She wants you by her side." I don't do galas, Eris said. You don't have to do anything, he replied, his voice gentle. Just be there. Stand in the light. Let them see you. So she went. Julian sent a designer to the estate, a tiny, ferocious woman who took one look at Eris and declared she would build a dress worthy of the architecture. The result was a gown of deep emerald silk that fell in a column to the floor, with a neckline that was architecturally precise and a slit that was just daring enough. When Eris looked in the mirror, she did not see the tired, haunted woman from the hospital corridor. She saw a queen. The gala was held in the hospital's newest wing, the wing Julian's family had funded. The air was thick with perfume and the sound of a string quartet. Eris felt a familiar prickle of anxiety as she entered on Julian's arm, but his presence was a calming anchor. He moved through the crowd with the unhurried grace of a shark in its own ocean. People parted before him. Conversations stopped. All eyes turned their way. Mrs. Choi was holding court in a large, comfortable chair near the stage, looking radiant. She beamed when she saw Eris and pulled her down for a hug. "Ah, my brilliant doctor," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The woman who gave me back my life." It was in this bubble of warmth and admiration that Marcus found her. He was drunk. Not sloppy drunk, but the kind of drunk that amplifies a man's worst qualities, burning away the thin veneer of civility. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loose, and his eyes had a wild, desperate sheen. He broke through the circle of well-wishers, his voice a harsh tear in the fabric of the evening's polite murmur. "There you are," he said, his gaze fixed on Eris. He ignored Julian completely. "My wife, enjoying the party." A shocked silence fell over the immediate area. The string quartet faltered for a moment before picking up the melody again, a little too quickly. "Marcus," Eris said, her voice cold and steady. "You need to leave." "Leave?" He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "I'm not going anywhere. You have an obligation to me, Iris. You owe me. Everything you are, I made you." Julian stepped forward, placing himself partially in front of Eris. It was a subtle, protective gesture. "Sit down, Marcus," he said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried an unmistakable weight of command. Marcus finally seemed to register Julian's presence. He sneered. "Ah, the money. I should have known. You think you can buy her? She's not for sale. She's mine. The law says so." He waved a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. "I have rights." "You have nothing," Julian said. His voice was still calm, but there was a new edge to it, the edge of a blade being unsheathed. "You have a failing medical practice that is leveraged to the hilt with loans from a bank that I purchased yesterday morning. You have a portfolio of stocks that, as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, is worthless. You have a house that is in foreclosure, a car that is about to be repossessed, and a reputation that is, as we speak, being systematically dismantled." He took out his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was a hammer blow delivered with chilling precision. "Mr. Kim, are you there?" he said into the phone. A voice, tinny and clear, replied from the speaker. "Yes, Mr. Choi. Please inform Dr. Marcus Thorne of the current status of his complaint with the State Medical Board." "The complaint has been summarily dismissed," Mr. Kim's voice announced to the silent, watching crowd. "A counter-complaint has been filed by the board against Dr. Thorne for filing a frivolous and malicious report, with a recommendation for immediate suspension of his medical license pending review." Marcus's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He stared at Julian, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "And the lawsuit?" Julian prompted, his eyes never leaving Marcus's. "Dropped," Mr. Kim's voice replied, "due to evidence provided by our team. Specifically, sworn affidavits from 6 different nurses detailing a pattern of harassment and abuse, security footage from the hospital corridor on the date of the initial incident, and a full financial audit showing that Dr. Eris Thorne was the primary financial contributor to the marital household for 7 of the 10 years of their marriage." The crowd was a sea of rapt, horrified faces. This was better than theater. This was a public execution. Marcus dropped the crumpled paper. It fluttered to the polished floor. He looked at Eris, his eyes pleading. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. It was the look of a man watching his entire world burn down around him and realizing he was the one who had lit the match. "Eris," he whispered, "please." She looked at him, not with hate, not with pity. She looked at him with a profound and final indifference. He was a ghost, a memory, a closed file. She turned away from him and took Julian's offered hand. Marcus let out a choked sob. He fell to his knees, his body shaking. The two silent, dark-suited men who had escorted him from the hospital corridor a month ago appeared as if from nowhere. They gently but firmly lifted him to his feet and guided him away, a broken man being led from the ruins of his own life. The silence he left behind was absolute. Then Julian squeezed her hand. He led her to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing. He tapped the microphone, the soft feedback cutting through the stunned quiet. "Good evening," he said, his voice now amplified, filling the large hall. "Forgive the interruption. My mother and I would like to thank you all for coming tonight to support this wonderful hospital." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "As many of you now know, my family has recently taken a more active role in the stewardship of this institution. Our first act as the new owners of the board will be to announce the creation of the Choi Center for Surgical Innovation." A polite smattering of applause rippled through the room. "But a center is just a building," Julian continued, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "Its success depends entirely on the vision of its leadership. For years, the most capable person in every room of this hospital has been overlooked. Her contributions have been minimized. Her brilliance has been stifled. That ends tonight." He turned and looked at Aris, his eyes shining with a pride that was so profound, so genuine, it took her breath away. "I would like to introduce the architect of my mother's recovery, a true pioneer in her field, and the new director of the Choi Center, Dr. Eris Thorne." He handed her the microphone. The room erupted in thunderous applause. It was not polite. It was a roar. It was validation. It was vindication. Eris looked out at the sea of faces, at the flashing lights of cameras, and felt a slow, steady peace settle over her. The weight she had been carrying for a decade, the weight of being unseen, unheard, and unvalued, simply dissolved. She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, handed the microphone back to Julian, and let him lead her off the stage. Later, they stood on the hospital's rooftop garden, the party a distant murmur below them. The city spread out before them, a glittering tapestry of light and possibility. The air was cool and clean. Eris took a deep breath, a real one, an exhale that felt like it came from the bottom of her soul. "Thank you," she said. He turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "For what?" "For seeing me," she said simply. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. His touch was warm, steady. It was not the grip of a possessor, but the gentle hold of a partner. "I am not an easy man, Eris," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "My world is complicated." "I don't leave because things become complicated," she replied, her voice firm. "I leave when they become dishonest." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw in his eyes a future built not on fairy tales or grand romantic gestures, but on something far more solid. It was built on mutual respect, on shared strength, on the quiet, daily choice to see another person clearly and to stand with them in the light. It was a future of complications, certainly, but also of partnership, a family built from honesty. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of old-world formal respect. "Then I suppose," he said, a true warm smile finally reaching his lips, "you're not going anywhere." No, she thought, looking out at the city that was finally, truly hers. She was not. She was home.